Hello, my name is Dennis Scimeca, Senior Editor for Technology at IndustryWeek. Welcome to Production Pulse. Today's topic is which manufacturing technologies are really worth your money? What provides you the most bang for your buck? Now, when we talk about Industry 4.0, modern manufacturing technologies, that's a large bucket. There are a lot of different things we could be talking about. Advanced robotics like cobots or autonomous mobile vehicles, additive manufacturing, IIoT systems with varying degrees of specificity, AI-based tools, vision systems, just to name a few. Now, I think one of the most important things for manufacturers to understand is that they don't need to work with, especially small and medium-sized businesses, don't need to work with these huge overarching systems. It doesn't have to cost a lot of money. There are smaller, more targeted systems that are affordable, but can still provide huge benefits for manufacturing. And so it comes down to choices. Which manufacturing technologies provide the biggest bang for your buck? And that's what we're here to talk about today. So my guests are joining me, Ryan Miller, Senior Research Director for Digital Transformation at ABI Research, and Dr. Paul Miller, Vice President and Principal Analyst for Smart Manufacturing and Future Mobility from Forrester Research Limited. Two of my favorite analysts. Gentlemen, thanks for joining me today. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Likewise.
All right, so let's have some fun. So we've decided that I will opine first because clearly I love talking. So for me, it's connected worker technology, the most bang for your buck. To a point, I feel like connected worker is a subset of MES in that, or manufacturing execution systems, in that MES might capture the sort of data that then gets piped to the worker via HMIs or tablets, smart devices, or even augmented reality glasses. But where an MES is kind of a top-down perspective, tracking all the information going on at the plant, a connected worker system focuses on the operator. Literally, it's about the worker. And connected worker can include things like kind of, there are connected worker systems that have message boards, kind of social network type tools to allow people to communicate in real time. It's the operator-centric nature of the technology that it kind of defines it. And it doesn't require a lot of hardware necessarily. Most people have smartphones. Tablets aren't that expensive. And I think it's, connected worker, I heard one expert say that what connected worker does is it allows operators to make decisions that they wouldn't be able to make if they didn't have that technology. And it can affect the day-to-day. It can have immediate effects, whereas another technology like an MES can provide information about, shift performance, that you can generate that single source of truth report and then at the end of the day look at it, but it's not real time. Whereas if if the cell or the unit whose work informs whether it's time for you to do your job, if you know what they're doing at any given moment, you can plan your schedule at that point. Whereas an MES can provide that. But so I think for me it's connected worker. Paul, what do you think?
Yes, or yes, but. I think, firstly, all the technologies you mentioned in your introduction deliver real value. IoT, robots, AI, all these other things, really useful, really powerful, really transformative, but often quite a big project. So if we're looking at something that delivers quick return on investment, doesn't cost you much to get started, begins to move the needle almost on day one, then the range of connected worker solutions clearly fits the bill there. And as you said, most people have a smartphone. It might not be a modern one. It might not be the latest iPhone or the latest Galaxy or the latest Pixel, but they've got a smartphone that can handle a lot of these capabilities. And we see connected worker use cases around things like safety, around things like efficiency, around things like worker autonomy, and around auditability, knowing that Dennis inspected that asset this morning and he replaced the following parts and all that, being able to log that clearly delivers some value. I think the other thing is it's about, pretty lightweight, pretty easy replacement of analog processes. It's about replacing the whiteboard that the team gathers around at 8 o'clock in the morning to talk about what the tasks are going to be, and instead moving over to something like a daily management system from a company like Fabrique, say in France. It's about digitizing work instructions. It's about replacing post-it notes and clipboards. All of that, quick, easy, lightweight, begins to deliver some value. There's then a much bigger piece. Now, I'll stop in a second, I promise, to see what Ryan has to say. But there's a much bigger piece that begins to open up around connecting these connected worker solutions to predictive maintenance, connecting them to AI and machine learning models to send the right engineer to the right place at the right time. There's connecting through to IoT platforms to give you real-time visibility into what assets are doing. That's all the next step. But there's a very simple, very easy, low-hanging fruit piece around just replacing some of the paper out there with these lightweight, accessible tools. And now, Ryan, are you going to say AI, or are you going to say, Paul, you're an idiot?
I feel like we can't get away from this conversation without talking about AI. Maybe first, though, to orient us, I would point out connected workers is an incredibly important topic. There's between 2.5 and 3 billion frontline workers. And connected worker applies certainly to those cohorts, but also the people across the organization in different parts in the supply chain. We look at solutions enabling connected work type capabilities, whether it's worker safety or better, broader business analytics. There are certain qualities of the solutions that are coming through strongly to drive a more attractive ROI. Notably, that would be around SaaS and cloud-based offerings, whether it's MES, or even the software running some of these other systems, robotics or additive, which do have a much longer tail in terms of their return on investment. But the reason why SaaS and cloud-enabled software is very attractive is because of the low barriers to entry. As a result, is that the new applications of capability are much more composable, meaning that what you pay for is only what you need. And importantly, you can scale up and scale down depending on that need, because need changes over time. And then also that makes updates easier. And in theory, it should make it easier to integrate with other systems.
So you're saying that you think connected worker technologies, that manufacturers should also look for ones that have that SaaS and cloud focus or capability when they're assessing options?
I would say it makes a difference. So if you look at MES and connected worker, I think are in many ways very symbiotic in terms of the evolution that they're taking. Where MES for a long time, it was these enormous projects, all on-prem. You need to hire someone outside to come in and not just set it up, but anytime you want to change it. And that's a really big deal because it makes change management, and change happens all the time, especially if you're releasing new products. Now, there is sort of the core MES functionality that's being decomposed, whether it's order fulfillment, demand planning, and even scheduling and fulfillment. And it's giving rise to this notion of MES plus, where it's MES plus quality, MES plus ERP. And that thematically is what's happening sort of across the industrial automation software stack, which is to bring in capability through these new cloud and SaaS-based offerings. Paul, is that what you're seeing also?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that notion of MES plus is an important one. We're seeing more and more of our clients talk about MOM instead or as well. So manufacturing operations management. And this idea that the MES on its own is only one piece of the puzzle. And you need to be able to communicate with the plus. Might be back up to ERP, might be down to the order management system, might be out to the warehouse management system. But being able to have bi-directional flows of data. And yeah, Ryan, you've stressed the importance of cloud and SaaS. And I think we're seeing a lot of the software vendors, but also a lot of their customers increasingly saying a deployment in one plant or on one line is not enough anymore. We need visibility across the entire organization. We need the ability to compare, things like OEE, overall equipment effectiveness, ensuring that every plant is using the same calculations and the same data and coming up with a number that is actually comparable.
Yeah, OEE is a really interesting example, in fact, because OEE historically has been a really hard metric for a lot of people to obtain. And then if you can't manage it, you can't manage it.
You can guess. That's what
you can guess. Yeah, but as a result, it's why so many OEE solutions were born in the cloud. And we see a lot of the OEE and data analytics market being cloud-based first. And what we anticipate to happen, in fact, is it's actually going to transition closer to the edge for some of this execution. The other thing I would point out is for digital transformation projects, we recently surveyed 500 manufacturers globally, and what we found was that more than half of the reasons that digital transformation projects are stalled are not for technology reasons, they're for people reasons. So people don't necessarily know how to be they don't feel comfortable with these newer technologies or how to implement, and AI is maybe a great example of that.
See, I think this speaks to the value of connected worker. To get directly to that point, Ryan, getting people familiar with the technology or comfortable with the technology, smartphones are comfortable for people, tablets, to have that immediate return on investment of seeing what the effects are like. Adding the social aspect, I think, is a bridge to get people using the technology. If they're able to communicate with coworkers from across the plant, they suddenly feel like closer colleagues. They feel connected. They feel like part of the team. And then you have them, they're using the technology. I find very often, I think with manufacturing technologies, when a manufacturer opens the door to one technology and that's successful, even a limited deployment, it opens the door wide very quickly. Because anybody who's uncomfortable with technology say, "Oh, this can work," that comfort level suddenly raises. I'm sorry, Paul, you wanted to jump in?
It's smooth. You're absolutely right. It smooths that on-ramp to adoption. The other thing it does, which is really important, is it gives the worker who is now connected, it gives them an immediate return. It gives them an immediate benefit. So many of these digital tools that are imposed from the top down don't actually make my life any easier or any better. They maybe make it easier for my boss to gather data about what I'm doing. They maybe make it easier for some distant field service agent to understand what the asset's going to need help with when it fails. But they don't immediately and demonstrably help me. It's just another exercise I have to go through. It's another tool I have to use. Whereas some of these connected worker solutions, you're right, it's bringing in the social aspect. I can reach out to Ryan for help, or I can reach out to Ryan and say, "Do you fancy a coffee? I'm bored." Both are important. But it also begins to deliver value where it's perhaps reducing the amount of form filling I have to do by connecting to previously disconnected processes. It's dealing with the fact that, Dennis, your handwriting is dreadful, and now you're typing, so I can read what you're telling me. All of these pieces help the worker immediately in the context they're in, and so that's going to help adoption, both of these tools, but as you said, smooth that on-ramp to the next tool that comes down from head office as well.
So I'm pretty excited actually about one of those next tools to help frontline workers, which I think we'll start to see a lot more of in 2025, and that's specifically around form filling type activities. So if you can think about field service or a maintenance task, any kind of work order form where, yeah, it gets through if you fill out 3 of the 10 areas. The machine, the time, and maybe what you did to it. But ideally, you really want to have all 10 filled out. And that's where we're seeing generative capabilities come in. And we're already seeing them implemented as part of the solution set. We're seeing customers use them as well. But it's going to become a much stronger element in 2025 as automated reasoning helps with some of the hallucination concerns around generative AI, and then as RAG adds better context to the outputs that you're getting. So what that means for an operator is that you're still doing your job. It's just much faster, easier, and more accurate.
And then bringing in silly things like the camera on that smartphone. Instead of typing in the serial number, just take a photograph of it and use machine vision to read it, and then check it to make sure it's right. But then, as Ryan said, using those generative capabilities to extend that perhaps into some of the note taking and some of the summarization capabilities as well. Real potential there.
Now, both of those points,
there can be really.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to offer that there can be really fascinating business model innovation as a result of some of what we're talking about here. One example in the pharma industry around documentation would be that every time that there's a company called Novo Nordisk, and every time they would release a new product, they need to have a PhD write a 300-page report documenting everything around that product. Now, what they're doing, what that means is that there's parity to scale. Or there really isn't scale; it just scales very linearly. So it's they would need to hire a whole bunch of new PhDs if they want to release more product volume and velocity in a certain year. Now, what they're doing is using generative AI to do the initial generative doc creation, and then they're having the PhDs review the documents. So instead of it taking them 6 months to write a document, the generative model is doing it in a day, and then they spend 2 to 3 days adding comments and tweaking it. And it is much more efficient. It actually is transforming the way the business is able to provide product to customers.
Yeah. And the real challenge there, we're seeing examples like this too. The real challenge is making sure the responsibility for the document clearly lies in the hands of that Danish PhD professional. Because the worst possible thing, we've all seen it, that convincing looking prose from ChatGPT looks believable, reads believably, reads better than I could write it myself, but it's riddled with hallucination. So we need to have workflows that make sure that the human who's doing the reviewing takes that role seriously and doesn't just say, yeah, it looks all right, I'll pass it off. They need to be responsible so that when there's an error in there that they didn't bother to pick up, the buck stops with them, not with the tool.
Yeah, responsible AI is a big deal, and even increasingly going forward. What's interesting too, we can expect to see around that space is right now we're talking a lot about text in and text out. First, it's going to be text in and anything out, whether it's images or videos. We're starting to see early examples of that. In 2025, though, what we can expect to see is anything in, anything out. So you can use video, image data, sensor data, log data as inputs to do something more meaningful. That's not just analysis, but action-oriented. The reason I mention this in the context of attractive ROI or where you should be looking is because it's actually less that there's going to be standalone generative AI offerings. Yes, there will be. But increasingly, what you should keep an eye out for are generative capabilities embedded within the existing software that you're already looking to buy.
As much as I don't want to sound like I'm proselytizing, I think that Connected Worker also speaks to use of AI. I think the best example I've heard of, you could call it generative AI, you could call it natural language processing, tomato, but coming up with maintenance reports on the floor to have AI that knows where a technician is on the floor and knows what machines typically get reported on. It can autofill fields to provide more details as opposed to, oil leaking. Well, that doesn't necessarily help anybody, but this machine, oil leaking is probably from a Connected Worker speaks to that in as much as everybody needs to have a device to do that. People are used to the clipboards, the checkboards. They need to get used to speaking into their phone to generate those reports. That could be an aspect of Connected Worker. So again, I think it's an enabling technology that can go in different ways. And just to touch upon it, Ryan, because I don't want to ignore it, you talked about OEE. The Connected Worker helps with that as well. So you know what's going on upstream and downstream. So if you have multiple tasks to choose between, if you're waiting on somebody else's work to be completed, and you have multiple jobs to choose from, and you know that cell or that person isn't ready, you can switch to something else. You keep an operation, getting more efficiency, just being aware of what's happening in the plant. Sorry, Paul, you were going to say?
No, I was just going to build on that idea of using context and what the device knows about where it is and who you are, cutting down on the amount of unnecessary form filling. If I'm holding my phone, don't ask me what my name is, and if I've handed my phone to Ryan, clearly the field can be changed. He can delete Paul Miller and put in Ryan Martin. But assume if it's my phone, it's being used by Paul Miller. Using the camera to scan a serial number instead of having to type it in. Knowing what the date is instead of asking what date you're filling the report in on. Knowing what the time is instead of asking you that. Knowing what parts you checked out of the supply closet. All of that stuff, pre-filling to cut down the amount of time I have to waste filling in unnecessary information, also reducing the opportunity for error, but always allowing the human to change it. We've all seen the forms where it asks you the date and it's not an editable field. And you're going, actually, I'm filling in the form for yesterday's expense report, not today's. Why can't I change the date? So that, allowing that flexibility, allowing that editability, but making the right intelligent default solutions. And that's something we're going to see a lot more of, I think.
It tends to seem like there's what's fascinating too about Connected Worker and Paul, I'm actually thinking back, we might have toured this factory together, but it was one of the Mercedes factories, and it's amazing how connected a lot of these folks were at the time, and this was over a year ago at this point. And of course, automotive, highly complex, 30,000 parts in a vehicle, and a lot of the operations mandate automation. And I mention this because what really comes through is that there's a ton of really interesting things happening, lots of innovation. It just isn't always evenly distributed. And so it's important too to think about what is like the art of the possible, or where you're headed. So when we think about digital maturity and some of these solutions, we measure it on a level of 0 to 5, much like autonomous driving, except instead of level 5 being a fully autonomous vehicle, it's a fully autonomous factory or a lights out factory. The reality, and this is really important to stress, is that most factories never in the history of the world will operate an entirely lights out capacity. They just simply don't need to, or they'll actually be better with human in the loop. Maybe semiconductor fabs are one of the few examples just because of their clean room requirements. So if you think about your business and how some of these connected solutions fit into it, it's not doing everything. And that's why we're trying to sort of pare things back. So a few things I want to pare back in terms of additive manufacturing would be one. Generally speaking, pretty long ROI unless you already know what you're going to produce, and it's unique in your market. Some of the robotics implementations, to be frank, it's still fairly early days for robotics. And maybe I want to share the mic here about sort of the other end of the lens, but I'll mention those two to get us started in terms of where, we talked a little bit about where to double down, but where also maybe to deprioritize or be a little bit critical if you had to.
Yeah, and I think I would agree with both of those. I think it's important to understand what you're trying to achieve. I'm sure, Ryan, you get these calls too. The client rings up and says, I want an AI project, or I want to deploy an industrial IoT platform. And my immediate response is, why? What's the problem you're trying to solve here? Is it, I can't recruit enough staff? Is it there's too much unpredictability and variance in a process? Is it it's a clean room and I don't want dirty humans in there? Understanding the problem you're trying to solve and then deploying technologies smartly to do that. The worst possible thing to do is to say, ABI Research and Forrester tell us, robotics is the #1 emerging tech for 2025. I must go and buy robots. That would be completely the wrong thing to do, unless you have a use case that needs some robots.
So we're talking about AI, we're talking about additive, in as much as we're talking about kind of bang for your buck. Are these cheap technologies? Are they expensive technologies? If you have if you're a small or medium-sized business, where do you put your money? How do you keep expenses down? How do you deploy these things economically?
I would suggest looking to areas to de-risk the business largely. Also, anywhere there used to be some companies too that would offer literally an insurance-backed guarantee. If you didn't hit the ROI that they professed within a certain time window, they would literally give you your money back, with the important caveat being they never actually had to give you your money back. Sensei is one example of that company. They were acquired by Siemens, and Relayer, I think, is another. They were acquired by a reinsurance company.
Munich Re, yeah.
Yeah, and the so for I'm losing my train of thought here, but I'm completely losing my train of thought. Someone else has got to pick up.
I can jump in, Paul. So we were talking about cost. To jump back to connected worker, and I'm thinking about one of the things I think a manufacturer needs to know is if they want to implement connected workers successfully, they can't just think about the technology implementation. They also need to think about culture. I think that breaking down silos, the ability to break down silos, is important in order for connected worker. I was touring a plant earlier this week, and they talked about having their one team philosophy, where if something is going wrong on the line, the operator feels comfortable going straight to the engineer to talk about what the problem is, rather than having to go through a supervisor on the floor or to file a report at the end of the day, which then goes through the chain of command. I think connected worker engenders that sort of communication. And I wonder whether that's a necessity in order for a manufacturer to get the most out of their connected worker technology. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think there's certainly an important aspect of change management, of culture. whether the largest, most modern manufacturer wants any frontline worker able to go to any engineer at any time, in principle, it sounds like a good idea. And certainly being able to take and maintain responsibility for your work is clearly important. But processes and chains and workflows are often there for a reason. To reduce load on very small numbers of the experts that everyone would go to all the time. But there's certainly value in thinking through responsibility, thinking through how you smooth some of those flows and processes. Challenge them, absolutely. Don't throw them all out. The structures and hierarchies are there for reasons that may still be valid.
And then maybe the challenger element to this entire equation is, is there an opportunity to rethink what best looks like? Because many solutions still are oriented around like legacy process optimization, Six Sigma, Kanban type stuff, Toyota Production System. Like, what is the pulse of the modern smart factory? What is the pulse of the software defined factory? What are solutions that help protect and insulate against risk? Something that we haven't talked about, but maybe is a fine place to close on, is around the application of AI, which is simulation. So if you can simulate potential intended outcomes to avoid big mistakes or big investment decisions. I recently heard of a nuclear power company that procured $1 million worth of PLCs only to find out they didn't do what they wanted them to. So they scrapped them, $1 million worth of product. But with the ability to virtualize that implementation before actually doing it, they could have avoided that scenario.
Yeah.
So let me ask then, if a manufacturer, AI is clearly an extremely important technology going forward and something that manufacturers probably need to be looking at. What is a way to economically implement AI? How do you start with it? How do you break the ice with AI to prove the value proposition, to get people comfortable with using it? What's the most economical way to get started with that technology?
I think Ryan said this earlier on. A lot of it is actually going to start coming in the products you're buying anyway. You don't go out and say, I want to buy some AI. You buy, or you upgrade your MES. You upgrade your predictive maintenance system. You upgrade your warehouse management system. The next version comes with bits of AI in there. You look for, we've mentioned Siemens already, but you look at things like their industrial co-pilot solution, where an AI chatbot is guiding you through the documentation you've already got, taking that field service engineer to the right bit of the manual with the wiring diagram they need for the task they're just about to do. And most of the other industrial software firms have very similar solutions, either out on the market or being talked about and coming to you very soon now. So AI will be all over the place, but a lot of the time it will be sitting behind the scenes, just subtly, quietly enhancing the work you are doing without you necessarily knowing you were talking to an AI at all.
The single most important thing, I would completely agree, is getting your hand, is rolling up your sleeves and getting involved. Because what is likely to happen in the next 12 months is we're going to see a lot more discussion around agentic applications, where as a result of your familiarity with how AI, whether it's a co-pilot or something else, works within your existing environment, these future coming agentic applications, and agentic, the root word is agent, idea is that you can then coordinate these, basically the working pieces of your software for better automation. So software automation that can actually make a difference in physical automation.
Yeah, and those agents, being importantly focused on very small, very narrow tasks, not trying to do everything, not trying to be the co-pilot or the chatbot for every use case, but training an agent to just help me maintain a pump, and then a different agent help me maintain a motor, and a different agent help me maintain an AGV, and you chain those together in the agentic approach that Ryan was talking about to tackle larger problems. But each agent is very tightly focused on a very narrow, very discrete problem space, which makes it easier to maintain, easier to manage, and easier to understand what it's doing as well.
And of course, you can eventually have connected agents, like you have connected workers where all the AI are talking to each other.
That's the agentic thing.
And then you have to
chaining
worry
agents together, yes.
And you have to worry about digital unions and all the other things that go along with it. With that, that's the time we have for today. I'm going to wrap it up. Once again, I want to thank my guests, Ryan Martin, the Senior Research Director for Digital Transformation at ABI Research, Dr. Paul Miller, Vice President and Principal Analyst for Smart Manufacturing and Future Mobility from Forrester Research Limited. I am Dennis Scimeca, Senior Editor for Technology at IndustryWeek. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and I hope you have a productive remainder of the day. Thanks for joining us.